Okay. Good evening and welcome to this public briefing of the Standing Committee on Social Development. My name is Jane Wayalen Armstrong and I am the MLA for Montpellier Clinton Region and Chair of the Standing Committee on Social Development. I will now ask member in the room to introduce himself for the record, starting from to my left.
Kieran Testard, member for Range Lake. Thank you for being here with us tonight.
Thank you. Danny McNeely representing the SA2.
Thank you. George Nearsew, MLA for the Mackenzie Delta.
Shauna Morgan, MLA for Yellowknife North.
Errol Yakala, member for the Echo. Thank you. Okay, and those that are online, introduce yourself. Okay. Okay. I believe Robert Hawkins is with us online. Okay, so thank you, member. Today we will receive a briefing on the statutory review of the Legal Aid Act from the Minister of Justice. Please note this meeting is being live streamed to the Assembly social media channel. I would like to remind all members and witnesses to direct all questions and comments to myself as chair and to wait to be recognized before speaking to help us have a smooth meeting. I will now pass it over to our presenter, Minister of Justice. Please introduce yourself and proceed with your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm pleased to be here today to speak to you about the Legal Aid Act. The Act has been law in the Northwest Territories since December 2014, when it replaced the Legal Services Act, which had governed the provision of legal aid services since 1979. Today, I am joined by Brad Patzer, Assistant Deputy Minister Attorney General, Tracy Bach, the Executive Director, Legal Aid Commission, Rhonda Sherrigan, my Ministerial Special Advisor, and Freddie Bergeron, my incoming Ministerial Special Advisor. The legislation provides a modernized governance and operational structure for the delivery of legal aid services using an integrated staff lawyer and private practitioner model. It also retains one of the most generous legal aid eligibility policies in Canada. The Act commits the Legislative Assembly to undertake a review of the legislation 10 years after its passing. The review is required to include an examination of the administration and implementation of the Act and the effectiveness of its provisions, and may include recommendations for changes to the Act. The Department believes the Act currently functions as intended and legal aid services are effectively administered. There is, however, always room for improvement, and we look forward to the completion of the review and any subsequent recommendations that may arise. Today's presentation will provide members with an overview of legal aid in the Northwest Territories, the Act and its functions, as well as some information on the operation of the Legal Aid Commission. With your permission, I would ask Brad Patzer, Assistant Deputy Minister, Attorney General, to provide a short presentation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Quick little history on the legal aid in the Northwest Territories on the first slide. Excuse me. The process for the transfer of the administration of justice from the federal government to the GNWT began in 1969. Prior to this date, the federal government had responsibility for all aspects of administration of justice in the Northwest Territories. As part of the transfer process, the NWT Legal Aid Program was born in 1971 when the governments of Canada and the government of the Northwest Territories signed a cost-sharing agreement for legal aid services. The Legal Services Board was established at that time. It was given responsibility for providing legal aid, court worker services, and public legal education and information services. However, an ordinance respecting the provision of legal services to certain persons was enacted by the GNWT in March 30th of 1979, some years later. Next slide, please. The Legal Aid Act replaced the Legal Services Act in 2014, and the Legal Services Board was replaced by the Legal Aid Commission of the Northwest Territories at that time. The new act reflected a modernized governance and operation structure and included a service delivery model that utilized both staff and private practitioners. The new Act also requires a review of the provisions and operation of the Act following every 10th anniversary of the coming into force of the new Act. Next slide, please. The overview of the Legal Aid Act. The Act exists to promote access to justice throughout the Northwest Territories. The Act mandates the provision of accessible legal aid services, the promotion of public legal education, the promotion of alternative dispute resolution processes that respond to the needs of eligible persons. The Act also changed the Legal Services Board into the Northwest Territories Legal Aid Commission. The role of the Minister. Section 3 of the Act provides that the Minister must consider the recommendations made by the Legal Aid Commission. It gives the Minister the authority to determine the number of staff members and to establish and modify programs and services that are offered by the Legal Aid Commission. It also gives the Minister authority to enter into agreements with the Government of Canada regarding the cost sharing of legal aid programs. In this regard, the Minister has entered into 2 agreements. The Access to Justice Services Agreement. This is the agreement that speaks to the funding for criminal and civil matters and for the funding of public legal education. There's also the Access to Justice Indigenous Court Worker Program, and this agreement, of course, speaks to the funding of the Court Worker Program that's run by the Legal Aid Commission. The Legal Aid Commission, as noted earlier, was established under this Act. The Act also provided that the Commission is independent from the Government of the Northwest Territories, but that it functions with financial accountability regarding the spending of public funds. The Commission itself is comprised of 3 to 5 members. 1 member is a lawyer nominated by the Law Society, 1 member is a member of the Public Service, and the other 1 to 3 members must reflect the Northwest Territories' diversity. The Legal Aid Commission members currently are Paul Parker, who was nominated by the Law Society of the Northwest Territories, myself, Brad Patzer, the member of the Public Service, and Alana Miro from Inuvik, who is the chair of the Legal Aid Commission, Joan Mercredi, who is from Fort Smith, and Jennifer Frankie Smith from Yellowknife. Each commission member has been appointed for a 3-year term. The Legal Aid Commission has both duties and powers under the legislation. The duties of the Commission are outlined in Section 4.8 of the Act. Some of the notable authorities include the preparation of an annual report by the Commission, which is tabled in the Legislative Assembly annually, making payments to legal counsel who assist in the services to the Commission and its clients. The Legal Aid Commission hears appeals from decisions made by the Executive Director. The appeals are filed by applicants whose applications are denied or who are required to contribute toward their legal fees, and to hear reviews on claims for remuneration that are filed by panel lawyers themselves. The powers of the Legal Aid Commission are outlined in Section 4.9 of the legislation. Some of the notable powers are the ability to make guidelines for the provision of legal aid services, establish and maintain panels of lawyers to provide the legal services, the opening of legal offices, the establishment of programs for the provision of legal aid and training for court workers. In this regard, the Commission has approved guidelines for the provision of legal aid services. The guidelines provide internal information to lawyers and staff on how legal services are to be delivered. They include guidelines on criminal legal aid coverage, conflict of interest, the outreach legal aid clinic, guidelines for child protection, family law, and civil coverage, guidelines regarding financial eligibility and the application process, guidelines for lawyers generally, guidelines for travel and disbursements, and guidelines regarding the designation of panel lawyers to the Legal Aid Commission. The role of the Executive Director is also guided by the Legal Aid Act. The Executive Director is also the Chief CEO of the Commission. The ED is to supervise staff and act as Secretary to the Commission at all Commission meetings. The Executive Director has the authority to enter agreements on behalf of the Commission and to contract with lawyers and provide legal aid services. The services covered by the Legal Aid Commission. Services provided may include services for criminal offenses, child protection matters, family law matters, NWT legislated offenses such as Motor Vehicle Act and Liquor Act offenses, and for youth in youth court. The legislation does not allow legal aid to provide services for defamation actions, business or real property transactions, labor matters, or election dispute matters. Eligible persons. The Act itself speaks to who is an eligible person. The Executive Director is to determine who an eligible person for legal aid services is. In the application process, a potential eligible person is to provide financial and other information to the Executive Director. Once that information is reviewed, the Executive Director will either authorize the provision of legal aid services and assign counsel, or will deny coverage. One of the unique aspects of the legal aid program in the Northwest Territories, especially for criminal matters, is that all persons are presumed eligible in court until they enter a not guilty plea or hire a private lawyer. Presumed eligible persons have the help of duty counsel who is in court. Once a not guilty plea is entered, the eligible person must either apply for legal aid to be assigned a lawyer or retain their own counsel. The Act also specifies that for family law matters, a lawyer must provide an opinion on the merits of the case. If the lawyer opines that there is merit, then a family law lawyer will be assigned by the Executive Director. The legal aid lawyers. Who are they? The Legal Aid Commission provides its services primarily through staff lawyers, panel lawyers, and court workers. There are 30 criminal law panel lawyers, 5 of whom are resident in the Northwest Territories. There are 11 panel lawyers, only one of which is resident in the Northwest Territories. Of the 11 family panel law lawyers, 5 of those family law lawyers also do children's law work. In terms of staff lawyers, there are 9 criminal positions. Only 4 positions are currently filled. There are 5 family law positions. Only 3 of those positions are currently filled. And the Legal Aid Commission currently has 2 articling student positions and students who are on rotation. In terms of court workers, the court workers have offices in Betchico, Fort Simpson, Fort Smith, Hay River, Inuvik, and Norman Wells. There's 1 court worker in Yellowknife and 1 at the Legal Aid Outreach Clinic. The court worker program was established 51 years ago. They assist clients in all of their communities. They know their communities, and they are helping their contacts. They do provide some translation services as needed. They provide assistance to the court and are often called upon by a judge for information and/or answers to specific questions. They book appointments for the lawyers, they help find clients, and they help find clients' contact information. They also assist in taking applications for eligible persons. In terms of how matters are assigned, that responsibility lies with the Executive Director. The Executive Director will consider the client's rights, fiscal responsibility, conflicts of interest, and the legal expertise necessary in each case. When issues arise between a lawyer and a client, the client may be reassigned. However, the legal aid guidelines provide that the Commission will not provide legal counsel to a person who terminates the services of their lawyer unless there is a valid reason for that termination. The Legal Aid Act also provides that legal aid clinics may be established by the Commission. There are currently 3, the Yellowknife Legal Aid Clinic, the Samba Cay Legal Aid Clinic, and the Community Legal Aid Clinic. Each clinic offers both criminal and family law services. There's also the Outreach Legal Aid Clinic. That office is staffed by 1 lawyer and 1 court worker. It is a very busy place. In terms of the presentation on the slide with respect to the Outreach Legal Aid Clinic, there is 1 correction to be made. The clinic's policy initially was to offer up to 3 hours of free legal advice to each client that comes into the office. The Commission in the past year reviewed that policy and recently reduced this to 1 hour of free legal advice because of the volume of work going through that office. In terms of statistics, in the 2023-24 fiscal year, the clinic assisted a total of 1,135 people. The outreach lawyer also travels to communities throughout the Northwest Territories. In terms of funding for the Legal Aid Commission, as I indicated earlier, there are 2 sources, or 2 agreements with the federal government. The other source of funding, of course, is the government of the Northwest Territories. The GNWT base budget for legal aid services in 24-25 fiscal year was just over $7.4 million. Under the cost-sharing agreement with the Department of Justice Canada, the GNWT can claim up to 70% of eligible costs to deliver legal aid services in the Northwest Territories, with a total maximum claimable of just over $2.8 million. This was for the 24-25 fiscal year. If my math is correct, the GNWT then pays about just over $4.6 million of that budget, or approximately 62%. The current funding arrangement with the federal government extends till 2027. The federal government recently provided a bump in funding from Justice Canada in the amount of $433,000 for the NWT. Uncertainty in funding amounts from the federal government is an issue, not only for the Northwest Territories Legal Aid Commission, but also for other provincial and territorial legal aid programs. It is a topic that is discussed every year at the annual Legal Aid Federal Provincial Territorial Meeting. In terms of statistics from the Legal Aid Commission, there is a slide that has statistics from 2017 through to 2023 for 5 years. What you'll see from the graph is that legal aid criminal matters are increasing and currently are at a historic high. Family law matters are slowly decreasing in volume, and youth criminal matters have been fairly consistent over the past 5 years. 89% of applicants have self-identified as Indigenous in the 2022-23 fiscal year, and the vast majority of the approvals for applications made to the Commission were for criminal cases. In conclusion, in terms of overall considerations, the Executive Director feels that the legislation has been functioning well since it was brought into force in 2014. The Legal Aid Commission does have operational concerns, such as lawyer recruitment and retention, that are of pressing nature. And as noted earlier, consistent and long-term federal funding is required to address and manage the legal aid plan in the Northwest Territories. As the demand for services increases, as we are seeing in criminal law matters, we will continue to work with our federal and other provincial and territorial counterparts in terms of consistency of funding and increased funding to meet the increasing demand. Those are all the comments I have for my presentation. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you for the presentation. I will now ask members if they have any questions. Ms. Morgan?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you for joining us here tonight. My first question is around how the Legal Aid Commission is established. There's 3 to 5 members appointed for 3-year terms. One must be a lawyer, one must be a member of the public service. Can you go over who the current members of the commission are and like who they represent in terms of if they, represent the public service or a lawyer or some other component or agency within the commission? Thank you.
Okay, so, Minister, so who would, okay, to Mr. Brad Hatzer, yes.
Thank you. The Act states, as you indicated, that the 2 specified members, one is the nomination from the Law Society in the Northwest Territories, that is Paul Parker currently. One is a member of the public service, I fill that role currently. And the other members are simply appointed from the public, and the Act only states that they are to be appointed in consideration of the diversity of the Northwest Territories. Ads were, whenever a vacancy occurs, advertisements for the positions are put out to the public. Alana Miro is from Inuvik. The Act doesn't specify that the appointments are supposed to be regional, just that we're supposed to consider the diversity. Alana Miro is one of the appointees. She's from Inuvik, and she's also the chair of the Legal Aid Commission currently. Joan Mercury is one of the other appointees. She's from Fort Smith. And Jennifer Frankie Smith is the most recent appointee, just in the last several months, I believe, and she's from Yellowknife.
Thank you, Ms. Morgan. Do you have a follow-up question?
Thank you for that. And so when the commission makes recommendations, it says the minister has to consider what the commission's, views are on any given thing, but have there been cases where the commission recommended something, but the minister sort of ignored those recommendations, and if the minister does choose to ignore what the commission is recommending, is there a process for, having to justify that or go back and forth? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Patzer? Oh, okay. Okay, Mr. Patzer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Act in Section 3 indicates that the Minister shall consider recommendations made by the Commissioner under the Act. In terms of process, I'm not aware of any other procedural matters that are governed by the Act. That's all I can say with respect to that process.
So, do you want to? Okay, yes, okay, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for that. So I guess I'd like to zero in on decisions that were made around eliminating the Office of the Children's Lawyer and bringing it within legal aid. So eliminating it as a standalone office. So my understanding was that the Legal Aid Commission had expressed concerns about that, and yet the decisions went ahead. And so I'm trying to understand now the role of the commission in influencing, how this critical program proceeds within legal aid and how the minister's decisions take into account the views of the commission around what should be done going forward with the Office of the Children's Lawyer. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Mr. Okay, Minister.
Thank you. So the Legal Aid Commission is very much self-driven. It makes its own decisions, and recommendations are, generally given a lot of consideration. And I think generally there's a good working relationship, and the recommendations that are brought forward are ones that can be actioned. But the Act also states that the minister may. Sorry, there's language in here about what's the budget language? That was 3. Well, I guess the minister may establish, modify, or discontinue any service of the commission. And so we have to consider the commission's recommendation as per the legislation, but we also have the ability to make a determination given the factors that the minister has to consider. So the Legal Aid Commission considers the functioning of the Legal Aid Act, and we have to consider a multitude of other things, such as the overall fiscal health of the territory, the budget of the territory, the priorities of the Assembly, the mandate of the government. And so there's an interplay between the Legal Aid Commission and the minister in terms of that. So not every recommendation is accepted wholly, I suppose. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Minister. Okay, Mr. Tester?
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's more of a question for Mr. Bach and the day-to-day operations of the commission, but are there any improvements we can make or change, I guess just changes to the legislation that would allow for the smoother functioning of the commission, just on a day-to-day basis rather than kind of a more high level? Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So for 5 years, I've been the Minister of Justice, and for 4 of those of ECE as well. So I think I've probably had more acts under my portfolios than any other minister for the last 5 years, and I can say I've had a lot of issues with a lot of those acts. This is one where the act itself hasn't caused me any issues. There's been no concerns raised. But in terms of the day-to-day functioning, I'd like to hand that to Mr. Bach. Thank you.
Mr. Brock?
Thank you very much. In the day-to-day operations, I have no issues with the Act.
Thank you. Mr. Tester, do you have a follow-up question?
Sounds like our job's done. Let's wrap it up. No. So on the resourcing, because I note in your presentation, resourcing is an issue around retention of staff lawyers or panel lawyers. No, staff lawyers. So could you speak more to those concerns and how it's impacting the provision of legal aid services in the Northwest Territories? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Brock?
Thank you very much. We have a number of panel lawyers who are resident in the Northwest Territories and also from outside of the Northwest Territories. We also have staff lawyers, so we have a hybrid staff lawyer, panel lawyer model. Right now, we've had some difficulty through the hiring process in terms of getting new lawyers, finding new criminal lawyers to move to Yellowknife and take up staffing positions. This is something that is happening with legal aid plans across Canada. There seems to be a very shallow pool of people who are doing criminal law. We do staff most of our circuits with panel lawyers, and we have most of our Yellowknife matters being dealt with by resident staff lawyers. We could certainly use more staff lawyers. We are constantly looking for more staff lawyers.
Yes, Minister.
Thank you. And I'll also say that, certain areas, like especially family law, it's very tough. It's emotionally draining on lawyers, and I think the average career of a family lawyer, whether or not you're in legal aid or private practice, is relatively short. And so just the nature of the work, there's lots of turnovers. But in the Northwest Territories, the last time I checked, I think we have about 4 times as many lawyers per capita as the rest of Canada. So there's a lot of competition as well for the roles. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the information. So move on to Mr. McNeely.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is, how is the department and/or the commission promoting public knowledge of the law through legal aid? Are there any examples? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mr. Patzer or Mr. Brock? Ms. Brock, okay.
Thank you very much. We have an outreach clinic that goes to different communities on a fairly regular basis in the Northwest Territories. We've also had lawyers go to schools to talk about legal aid. We'd like to do that kind of thing a lot more.
Do you have a follow-up questions, Mr. McNeely?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I do support this program. I think it's a program that's really providing a meaningful service considering our society. And my next question there, Madam Chair, is how is the department or commission promoting public knowledge of this service through the legal aid? Or what type of awareness? Like, take one of the Satu communities. Are they familiar with the existence of this office and this clinic and this commission and where to go should they have an issue? Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Minister.
Thank you. So the Legal Aid Outreach Clinic does travel to different communities. I'm not sure when or if they've been to the Sawtoo. I know I've seen them in my community. As an MLA, I promote the Legal Aid Outreach Clinic and the court workers quite often. I send many constituents to the court worker and to the outreach clinic because they provide valuable services. When they come to town, I see posters all around. There's advertisements in the newspapers. They put on clinics about wills and marriage and divorce and things like this. So they do go out to communities. They do put on presentations and advertise when they have those presentations. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Nersu, you have a question?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for your presentation. I just have one question here in regards to land entitlement, wills and estates for residents who may have lost loved ones and don't have any wills to uphold their land entitlement or their homes. Has the department considered expanding legal aid to include these types of residents who are looking at wills and estates? Because right now, I think if they want to get their land entitlement or homes turned over into their names, they have to go to court. And with the two cases that I've dealt with in my home community, I've told them that they have to go to court and it's on their own costs, and they said they're just going to leave it because they can't afford it. So has the department considered expanding legal aid to include these types of cases? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. Minister?
Thank you. When it comes to wills, if someone passes without a will, it's an ordeal. I mean, even with the will, there's still a lot of work, but without a will, then the courts get involved. And so I encourage everyone to go out and get a will. It doesn't matter how old you are. It's an important document to have. I know the Law Society has put on or received some funding in the last couple of years and has done some work in that regard. But perhaps we'll start with Mr. Patzer, see if he has anything to add to this, and then go from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The only thing I would add to that is that the outreach lawyer does provide advice with respect to wills and estates in a general way, but my understanding is the outreach lawyer does not draft wills on behalf of the clients that seek that advice. Am I correct in that?
Okay, Mr. Brock?
Yes, that is correct. The outreach lawyer will provide an hour of advice. I do want to underline that the Law Society has a wills program, and I know they have gone to different communities. Different lawyers have gone to different communities to assist people in drafting wills.
Thank you. George, do you have a follow-up?
Just clarification, so so you wouldn't consider it? That was my question.
Minister?
Thank you. So we have, I think Nunavut might have the most generous legal aid in the country. We have the second most generous, and by quite a long shot. When I was going to law school in Alberta, I think you had to be facing jail time before you would get legal aid. So it's a different world up here. And any additional work would be an initiative of the government, of the GNWT. There's no federal funding. And so it's something that, an initiative we would have to bring forward. I can definitely see the value in it. It ties up a lot of the time of the courts. It brings down productivity when people are busy dealing with these issues as opposed to working or doing other more productive things. So it's not something that I would be opposed to, but it's not something that has come forward as an initiative or received a lot of attention and really been pushed to this point. I'm not opposed to it. I wish we could have something like that, but every dollar is, fought over, and this is one that hasn't made the cut yet. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Ms. Yakalai, do you have a question?
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. Administration and implementation, has the department considered expanding legal aid to include legal supports to renters facing evictions, especially as it reflects to the right to housing? Thank you.
Minister?
Thank you. So evictions are governed under the Residential Tenancies Act, and the rental officer generally doesn't just boot someone out of somewhere to live. There's often a process by which they'll put in conditions. Someone has to, start making payments on rent that's owed. They have to not cause disruptions for a certain amount of time, whatever the case is. So there's already a process prior to eviction, and so maybe Mr. Patzer has something to add, or Mr. Block, but I'm not giving consideration to adding an additional layer of support prior to eviction. Thank you. But perhaps Mr. Patzer could add something.
Sir?
Don't have anything to add to the minister's except to confirm that there is usually conditions in place before an eviction is actually, the eviction orders issued by the rental officer are conditional, and as the Minister indicated, several months have to pass with the breach of those conditions before the eviction actually takes place and is confirmed by the court.
Thank you. Do you have a follow-up question?
Yes, I do. It's a different question related to when you said you had 941 people and 638 of them identified as Indigenous. That's quite alarming for me. So I wanted to ask, is your department working with other departments to kind of bring that number down? And if you are working with other departments, what are you doing? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Minister?
Thank you. So there's nothing in the Act that speaks to that I'm aware of, unless I'm missing something. So there's nothing in the Act that really speaks to that. I mean, we try to do many things across government to help people, keep them out of the court system. I mean, I don't really want to get into everything we do, but everything from income assistance, social services, you know, a number of these initiatives that the government has are intended to support people and help them avoid getting into the criminal justice system. On the other hand, we have the RCMP, whose job it is to make sure that people who are doing crimes are brought to the criminal justice system, and we've been making investments on that end as well. So it's a bit of a catch-22. Thank you.
I do have something too as well. Okay, I know that legal aid services is very important, especially in small communities and with you know, high rates of unemployment. So I know who who they service, and just like what Mr. Nersu said about the land's title, and you said that you know you guys do, or that department provides well, you know, services to the community members. I know in Klitschko region, I don't know if it was through Law Society, but there was a legal aid worker working with somebody probably must be from Law Society. They did provide well, you know, especially to our elders. They provided that services. Well, some of the elders, they pass on. And the well is there, and I did spoke to Minister of Maka before on this, and you know, the well is there, but nobody can do anything, can go further, especially with lands transfer. So what the land officer within the community government or with the community government office is telling client, you know, the well is there. We know who the property is going to go to. But it's telling client that you have to go get a lawyer. You know, even though the well is there, everything should be okay to do the transfer. And right now in Klitschko region alone, in Bichakun, there's about 50 cases like that, you know, a lot of, many of these elders have passed like 30 years ago. And it's still outstanding. And just like George, Mr. Nersu said, it costs a lot of money, from $10,000 to $40,000. And many of these people do not have that kind of money. And then with the high cost of living, you need every dollar that you make, you know, just to live. And so a lot of people are going that route too as well. Well, just leave it, you know. So there are like squatter, you know, like, because it's not in their name. The title is not in their name, the land's title. So I'm just wondering, like, so where can these people go now? Because they cannot afford. So they just continue living in a, you know, occupy the house and the property belonging to somebody else, you know, especially to the deceased family. So what can they do? What kind of services can maybe, I'm hoping legal aid will provide those services, or MACA lawyer or somebody to help this family to move forward. Mr. Patzer?
Thank you, Madam Chair. You're correct in that the legal aid program currently doesn't offer that type of service. And although I'm not an expert in wills and estates law, and I haven't had a lot of experience in the north in terms of probating wills, but I do know that there is a court process that is involved, if I'm not mistaken. So I acknowledge that is certainly a consideration in terms of getting the land transferred into whomever the will is specifies as the beneficiary. But at this point in time, the current legislation does not provide that service under the legal aid services that are offered.
Okay, thank you. Another one too is that here, there's a pie chart here. I don't know if you guys have that too as well. It's a home communities for outreach legal aid clients, and just like what Ms. Yakalaya said, majority of them are indigenous. North Slave region, and then there's Yellowknife region. Yellowknife, there's 48%, and North Slave region, it's 13%. Does that, there's two. Usually North Slave region, Yellowknife is part of North Slave region, but this time there's two. So, so majority of the client, where are they from, according to this pie chart? And then there's one, it says outside of NWT, 3%. So who are we serving outside of NWT?
Thank you. Are you referring to the annual report, and if so, on what page?
We have it here in our briefing note, the pie chart. Home communities, it's from the budget. Home communities for outreach legal aid clients.
I'm not sure if that's a committee-specific briefing note. I don't have access to that.
Well, but you should have those informations based on the stats that you have. Okay.
Page 13 of the annual report, the 2022.
Okay, page 13 of the annual report. That's all I know. Page, okay. Page 13, 2022, 23 annual report.
Thank you. So the pie chart has Yellowknife and then North Slave, and so the differentiation there is that the Yellowknife is Yellowknife and North Slave is the North Slave outside of Yellowknife. The 3% of out of territory, I'm not sure off the top of my head. As Mr. Patzer mentioned, there's a presumption that everyone's eligible for legal aid, so it could be individuals arrested from outside of the territory who have legal aid for that initial contact, possibly, but we can look further into this and provide committee with some information. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, thank you. If we don't have any more additional questions, okay, Ms. Morgan, second set of questions, okay? Yeah.
I just had one follow-up from my last line of questioning. Can you explain then what are the next steps with regard to the Office of the Children's Lawyer? So from your perspective, is it sort of all fine and good, it's perfect now, nothing more to be discussed, or are there conversations to be continued with the Legal Aid Commission around how to resolve concerns about any gaps or improvements that still need to be made, given the absence of a dedicated office, and how support and guidance and advice can be given to the roster lawyers serving children? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you. So, of course, the Office of the Children's Lawyer was eliminated, and so there is no Office of the Children's Lawyer, per se. And any new initiatives would have to be weighed against other initiatives. So far we've heard some other needs for wills, needs for land titles issues, and things like that. But in terms of the current situation and how things are operating and what's going to happen going forward, I don't think anything in the world is perfect, so I can't imagine the situation is perfect as is, but Mr. Bach can speak to that. Thank you.
Mr. Brock?
Thank you very much. So as you know, the children's lawyer was brought under the umbrella of legal aid, and children's files are now administered through legal aid, and we are providing lawyers to children. I can say that over the past 4 years, I have statistics that the number of children that have been helped by the Office of the Children's Lawyer or now through legal aid remain constant, which is about 30, 35 per year. I would have to say that I don't believe there is any change in the service for children. That being, children are assigned lawyers quite quickly, whether in territorial court or through Supreme Court. We have been working with the Director of Child and Family Services on the manual and other stakeholders, other lawyers that do children's law work. I am constantly in touch with the lawyers who do children's law with respect to any legal questions. Personally, I have practiced criminal law. We are also looking at further engagement with the stakeholders, and I am looking into training opportunities for the lawyers with respect to updating them on children's law issues and matters. So as I said, I do not believe that there is any difference in the services that would be provided by our hardworking lawyers who assist children in court. There is always room for improvement. However, I believe the services continues to help our children.
Okay. Thank you, Ms. Morgan. Okay, so you're okay? So if there's no more questions, I would like to say thank you for joining us today, and this concludes the public presentation of this Legal Aid Act. Thank you.